Next up, we have Electrode. This Pokemon has been around since the first generation, and many fans remember its exploding antics fondly. And there's been no shortage of those throughout the anime. Those who played the Gen 2 games and or their remakes will remember having to take down the trio of Electrodes in Team Rocket's Mahogany Town hideout, and struggling to catch them because they loved using Explosion. Today we'll be examining if Electrode's impact on the competitive scene was similarly explosive. And so, we ask, how good was Electrode actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. Generation 1's critical hit rates are based on the base speed of each Pokemon, and Electrode had the highest speed in the game. Ergo, it had an astonishing, unmatched crit rate of roughly 27.3%. Unfortunately, its good traits ended there. Sure, it had Explosion and Stab Thunderbolt, but its attacking stats were so pathetic that it didn't hit very hard even with crits. For example, 2 consecutive crit Thunderbolts had a sub 1% chance to 2-hit KO Snorlax, and a crit Explosion topped out at 93%. In conjunction with Electrode's complete inability to hurt Rhydon and Golem and non-existent bulk, as well as the fact that it was still not getting a crit to begin with well over 70% of the time, there was just no reason whatsoever to use it over Zapdos and Jolteon, who made up for their struggles against Rhydon and Golem by being far better against the rest of the metagame. They hit much harder without crits and still had great crit rates themselves, as well as being significantly bulkier and being able to threaten Chansey without necessarily needing to sacrifice themselves. Electrode wasn't able to leave any sort of impact on Yu either, as it was always walled by Dugtrio, but could at least lure in and blow up on that. Then, however, Golem dropped, and Electrode's viability dropped from semi-usable to non-existent. And so it fell to Ngu, and there, Graveler existed. And as fast as Electrode was, it couldn't outrun its move pool. Now, technically, it had the slightest of slight niches and Ubers, as Rhydon was less common, meaning Explosion would at least land on a neutral target, and Electrode was the one Pokemon in the game that could naturally outrun Mewtwo, meaning it could potentially land a paralysis on it and a crit Explosion or something. It wasn't actually used by top players, but as niche and paper thin as it was, it did exist on paper. Regardless, Electrode's debut generation was disappointing, especially considering it was a Pokemon with a crit rate that was more than quadruple that of the subsequent generations. Gen 2 was a mixed bag for Electrode. It had its crit rate nerfed to the now universal 6.25%, but Explosion had its power beefed up, and it gained coverage over ground types in the form of Hidden Power. While this wasn't enough for it to carve out any sort of niche in OU, it did establish itself as quite decent in UU. It would never sweep on its own, but it was able to switch in against common Pokemon like Scyther and Waters, proceeding to lure in Nidoqueen, Hypno, Blossom, or Ampharos, and destroying them with Explosion, proceeding to open up opportunities for its offensively minded teammates that normally get walled by these Pokemon. The tier's normal resists, usually Haunter and Kabutops, wanted nothing to do with Electrode's Thunderbolt, so the boom usually connected with its targets. Its main problem was that its usual Thunderbolt, Explosion, Hidden Power trio was completely walled by Magneton, who was reasonably common. However, with Spike support, Electrode's Explosion would do enough to its regular targets, so if it wanted to, it could feasibly use HP Ground to lure and destroy Magneton. It also allowed it to beat Electabuzz without resorting to Explosion, which was useful, as now Electabuzz could no longer prevent Electrode from blowing up on a bulkier and thus more valuable target. Electrode's lack of true defense utility meant it didn't fit on every type of team, but its unique, dynamic offensive qualities made it a great choice on select offensive teams. Overall, Electrode had a nice little niche in GSC UU. Electrode improved its station in UU again in the 3rd generation. With the new split EV system, Pokemon didn't automatically have their bulk maxed out, which let Electrode hit hard in general against the vast majority of the metagame, as many Pokemon didn't invest in bulk, or at least special bulk. But of course, this new EV system meant Electrode couldn't max all of its speed, special attack, and attack, meaning that in conjunction with its low offensive stats, it would still leave something to be desired power-wise. But thankfully, its speed was so high that it didn't require too many EVs there, allowing for a healthy dollop of investment in both attacking stats. It could easily afford to run a plus special attack nature, which helped a lot in letting it hit Pokemon like Kangaskhan as hard as possible. Also helpful was the addition of Pinch Berries. Electrode could use Substitute on a forced switch to scout what the answer to it would be, thereby allowing it to hit the switch in with the best move possible, and simultaneously bringing itself closer to activation range for Pitaya Berry, which gave it potential to sweep late game. However, though it could pull this off, it wasn't its primary purpose. Usually Electrode was used to wall break, as it was once again not answered by Pokemon that resisted normal, meaning Explosion would find its mark and leave a gaping hole in the opposing team to be abused by Electrode's teammates. For this reason, Electrode also sometimes used Lychee Berry to give itself a much needed attack boost and ensure that its explosion shattered its target. Electrode was often paired with a second electric like Manectric or Electabuzz, which were great abusers of Electrode luring and destroying their shared counters. It was particularly good at luring and destroying Vileplume and Ampharos, two otherwise nigh immovable roadblocks. The one exception to this was Cradily, but Electrode could easily slot Toxic over Hidden Power, which paired perfectly with Substitute and would utterly ruin not only Cradily, but every other non-Needle Twin ground type, such as Gligar, while the Needles could still be exploded on. Electrode could also run Leftovers as its item, especially if running Toxic, allowing it to create more substitutes and thus get more Toxic stalling done. And even if it didn't have Toxic, it allowed it to bluff the move and was generally nice for allowing it to switch in multiple times throughout a game, giving its users some flexibility for how it could be used. Overall, Electrode was a great Pokemon in Gen 3 UU, consistently able to cripple opposing teams to help out its teammates while also being a threat in its own right. Electrode's role in Gen 4 UU was completely unlike the previous two generations. It was now pure support, and in this support role, it was completely unmatched. Thanks to the addition of Damp Rock, which extended Rain Dance's duration from 5 to 8 turns, Rain teams took over UU, and Electrode was one of their best Rain setters. It had the fastest taunt, meaning it couldn't be out-taunted, while also preventing opposing entry hazards. After it set up Rain, it could explode, which ensured its Swift Swim teammates would hit the field safely, with the maximum amount of Rain turns. Electrode had a perfectly equipped toolkit for this role, as it easily and consistently set these conditions up for its teammates and let them wreak havoc on the entire rest of the metagame. It was able to start the game off reliably, as even if it got KO'd while using Rain Dance, that was ideal, ensuring even more Rain turns for its teammates. Rain was so powerful that several top players wanted it banned or neutered in some way, and Electrode's nigh unstoppable Rain setting prowess was a major part of how easy it was to set Rain up and then bowl the opponent over with unstoppable Pokemon. The idea of banning Damp Rock gained traction, but not enough for action to be taken. Electrode continued to grin at the opponents whose destruction it facilitated soon thereafter, right to the end of the generation. Electrode itself wasn't a game breaker, but the ease with which it provided such powerful support was game breaking, even when the opponent knew exactly what was coming. As such, Electrode played an important role on Gen 4 UU's most powerful team style. Now, as Electrode was only ever seen on Rain, it didn't have enough usage to truly be considered UU, and thus dropped to NU. Weirdly enough, it was worse down there than in the higher tier. Not an unheard of phenomenon, but a strange one nonetheless. The main reason was that Rain wasn't nearly as good in NU. Gorobus was good, but there were barely any other abusers, and these teams naturally struggled with NU staples like Poliwrath. They were generally outclassed by Sun teams. Electrode would have been a good Sun setter, but it didn't learn Sunny Day for some weird reason, so that went out the window. Now, as an all-out attacker, it was decent, especially with the much appreciated power boost of Life Orb. It just had a tough time not being outdone by Manectric, who had a much stronger Thunderbolt and Hidden Power, while also being tougher to counter thanks to its Fire-type coverage moves. This allowed it to run Hidden Power Grass while still not being checked by Vileplume. It could also cripple walls with Switcheroo, meaning it didn't have to blow itself up to do so, and could thus still be useful afterwards. Electrode wasn't bad per se, just not as good as Manectric. Regardless, it had its place within the NU metagame. Finally, at the peak of the Baton Pass controversy in OU, Electrode saw some use, as it shut down even the fastest taunters in Aerodactyl and Azel, while being able to set up Light Screen, which reliably enabled the monstrosity that was Double Boost past Gliscor. Eventually, BP in its entirety was banned, as it would have been regardless, but Electrode did make its own small contribution. Electrode's offensive stats had always been meager, but now with Gen 5's massive influx of power creep, they were downright pathetic. Plus, Explosion was nerfed, so it couldn't even use that effectively anymore. It fell past the new RU and into NU again, and this time around it couldn't muster any semblance of a niche. It was outclassed as a Rain Dance setter by Liepard, whose prankster ability made it even better at taunting and setting the rain up. Electrode had no shot as an offensive Pokemon either, as Zebstrika or Electabuzz would be better choices just about every time with their great coverage, as well as Electabuzz's higher special attack, and they were already plenty speedy for the NU metagame, outspeeding the already fast Charizard. Thus, Electrode's extra speed was usually gratuitous and not worth the coverage drop-off. Usually, the best thing Electrode could do was to surprise opposing players who didn't know its ability was Aftermath. It was a great ability and all, but it's pretty dismal to have it as your selling point, considering it requires its bearer to faint to be useful. By some miracle, Electrode managed to avoid dropping further into the limbo of untiered, But make no mistake, even in never used, Electrode was never used. Not that it needed any help falling to PU, which it did, but Electrode got knocked down further in Gen 6, with hidden power getting nerfed from 70 to 60 base power. Once again, it struggled as a fast electric type, as Zebstrika tended to be far better. The Zebra had several abilities that provided it with immunities to common attacks, be they electric or grass, which made it a lot easier to actually switch into battle, and once it was in, it was a far bigger threat than Electrode, thanks to its crucial extra coverage and overheat. Plus, there was a bigger issue. Zebstrika itself already stood in the electric type shadow of one of the 2 best overall Pokemon in the tier, Rotom Frost. Therefore, via the transitive property of viability, Electrode was really left in the dust. It technically could annoy bulkier teams with Taunt to stop them from healing off its moves, but it just generally wasn't worth it. Electrode wasn't outright bad, and it managed to avoid an untiered placement again, but it sadly didn't leave much of an impact on PU. It has been a long time coming, and it finally happened in Gen 7. Electrode hit untiered. Not that anyone was surprised. If anything, they were surprised that it didn't happen sooner. Technically, Electrode could try to set up screens on a hyper offense team, with Taunt preventing any attempts to defog them away, before exploding to get its powerful teammates in with maximum screen turns remaining. But this niche was paper thin at absolute best, and screens offense wasn't at all a reliable strategy in PU. Beyond the essentially non-existent screens niche, Electrode couldn't even try to do anything else, as it was as outclassed as ever by other offensive electric types such as Oricorio Pom-Pom and Alolan Raichu. Sadly, nobody even noticed that Electrode was in PU, much less that it tumbled out of it into that no Pokemon's land of untiered. And that's it. So how good was Electrode actually? Well, it spent most of its competitive career down in the dumps, being thoroughly overshadowed by other electric types and generally other Pokemon, as its non-speed stats are thoroughly mediocre to terrible. However, it's managed to carve out a few niches, most notably putting that speed alongside Taunt and Explosion to great use in helping make Rain the most feared playstyle in DPP UU. Unfortunately, the only time it was ever really truly a genuine threat on its own was in Advanced UU. Sadly, it hasn't received the buffs it so needs to keep up, even in the lowest of the lower tiers. Hopefully, whenever Electrode is reintroduced in the games, if it ever is, it will receive some minor stat boost and maybe a cool new move or two. A little goes a long way, and that would help it find a place in the lower tiers once again. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Electrode? How would you buff it to have it do anything else besides be really fast? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.